I had succeeded by selling my company for $700 million, but I felt like life was empty. That's when I had an itch to ride my motorcycle again.
Failing at that point, what was that feeling like?
They wanted to try new CEO. I was very disappointed. Ultimately, that business didn't work out. I was riding through the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. That's when I realized I was so happy, and I asked him, how did I get here?
In part of that transition, there's that loss of identity.
I realized that my true identity is an adventurer.
Michael Yang built and sold a Silicon Valley tech company for hundreds of millions of dollars. By every measure, he had won. And then the noise stopped. The meetings, the urgency, the chase. What remained was quieter and harder to ignore. A question that doesn't usually get said out loud. If I've done everything right, why does something still feel missing? Not failure, not regret, just the unsettling sense that success might not be the whole story. This conversation begins there. So Michael, I want to start by naming the heart of the conversation that we're going to have today. Now, you've achieved what most people would define as success, and yet there was a moment where you realized something still wasn't fully alive for you. Now, before we get into the motorcycle experience, which I'm really excited to dive into, and even the milestones that you've gone through, can you take me back, or take us back to when you first noticed that tension between being successful and feeling truly alive? When was that moment?
Yeah, that was when I was around 47, 48 years old. I had succeeded in business by selling my company for $700 million, though not all of it was mine. We had different ownership in the company, but still I came into a fortune. So that was quite an amazing experience. And then I had a beautiful family, my wife, and at that time, two children, and I had a good sort of community. But there was a moment where I felt like life was kind of empty, and I asked myself, is this all there is to life? I felt like there was something missing. And that's when I had an itch to ride my motorcycle again, something that I loved to do when I was 15 years old as a new immigrant to America from South Korea. And so that's when I sort of, answered that itch to start riding motorcycle again. And I bought a small Yamaha 225cc bike to start riding again. And I started riding around the San Francisco Bay Area through the mountains by the Pacific Ocean, and it was so much fun and so beautiful. It was so freeing. And that's when I started going on long motorcycle rides and then long cross-continental motorcycle trips.
What did the motorcycle represent for you at that time? Because I could imagine you could have chosen many different outlets. Why a motorcycle?
Yeah, so I have fond memories of motorcycle ever since I was a child. When I was growing up in Korea, things were pretty hard back then in the 60s in Korea because Korea had just gone through the Korean War. The country was devastated. There was not much food or resources available. And so there weren't that many cars even back then, and let alone motorcycles. But I was I was going to this class, and the instructor once showed up on his motorcycle, and seeing that instructor taking off his helmet as he was getting off the motorcycle, that like made a really impression that like that looks so cool. And if I grow up and have a chance to ride, I would love to do that. And I had that chance when I came to America when I was 14 years old, and in San Jose, California, there were other kids in the neighborhood that were riding mini bikes made with lawnmower engines, motorcycles that are small. And so one day I found out that this teenager was selling his 100cc Yamaha bike for $200, and I had just saved enough money at that time from working part-time jobs at 7-Eleven stores to buy that, and I did. And I bought it without even checking with my parents because it was something that I needed to ride to school, ride to my part-time work at 7-Eleven, and And so my parents were busy working because we were brand new immigrants to this new country. So um, yeah, they let me keep it after they found out that I bought it. Asked me to ride safe, but yeah. So when I started riding that motorcycle, I just like had so much fun. This little engine between my legs that was reverberating my body, and I was flying through the streets and through the mountains, and it was so freeing. And I didn't speak much English at that time. And I was adapting to a new country. I was this out of place teenager from Korea who was trying hard to fit in and learn the new culture, the new language, trying to make friends. But I think that motorcycle riding gave me a sense of freedom and independence that I cherished. And then later, then that motorcycle was stolen a few months later, and I was so devastated. But I didn't ride again for a long time because I didn't have money to buy another one, and I started driving. So and it wasn't until like 40 years, 30 years later, when I was 47 or 48, that I had the itch to ride again. And it was like by my body telling me, hey, you need to have some fun for yourself. It's great that you succeeded in business. You got a beautiful family. I have a faith that we go to church, but there was that something missing. And later I found out from another friend that self-care is not selfish. So, we need to take care of ourselves in terms of doing things that we enjoy doing rather than suppressing it or not doing it just because we have all these other responsibilities and obligations.
Thank you for sharing that. What's interesting is you've had a long journey, and I can imagine a journey that was very multifaceted in terms of coming to Canada and adapting, sorry, coming to the US, sorry, and adapting to the culture, the society. But you really succeeded in business. Why was that your path to move into entrepreneurial kind of adventures? Like, why did you make that decision?
Right. So when I was growing up in Korea, as I mentioned, the GDP in Korea in 1961, when I was born, was like $91 per year per person. So it was the one of the poorest countries in the world. It was poorer than many of the countries in Africa, Southeast Asia. And so, I mean, we didn't go hungry every day or anything, but I remember being hungry because I didn't have snack in the afternoon or I didn't have enough to eat. But I think I had this kind of drive and hunger to succeed and not have to worry about money when I grew up. And so when I came to America, I was 14 years old. I was going to high school, and San Jose became the sort of mecca of information technology, what became known as Silicon Valley. And so I was very fortunate that I had an uncle in my family who became very successful in his computer business. And I also was very fortunate to see Silicon Valley entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, who founded Apple Computer in 1976, that year that I came to America, and seeing him just taking an idea and building something using the technology that became a huge success. And Apple is, today everybody uses, iPhone and iPad and Mac computers, and so that really made me want to become a businessman or entrepreneur when I grow up, and so I think that was sort of the impetus or the circumstance that got me interested in business and entrepreneurship. And so I applied to Berkeley, and I was very fortunate to get into the electrical engineering computer science major. And I studied at Berkeley, and then I later went back to get my MBA from Berkeley. And I worked as an engineer for a couple of years after graduating from college and grad school. And I worked about 10 years in sort of engineering, sales, and sales support and marketing positions before I started my own .com startup called mysimon.com in 1998, when the internet was just starting to take off. And so that was sort of how I got to become an entrepreneur.
So that's incredible. The timing obviously was really amazing for you, and you took advantage of that. And I can imagine, as you were talking about earlier, you had a $700 million sale of your business at the end of it all. So it's assumed that you had a lot of great success and you enjoyed that success to some degree, but something was missing. There was still a little bit of a gap there for you. How did you recognize that? What were the signs that were manifesting in a way that told you, wait a second, I've achieved all this, but I'm not fulfilled.
So that's a good question. So in my book, I talk about um, how after selling my first company, my assignment for 700 million, I took some time off and I started two more startups. However, after raising venture capital investment and investing some of my own capital, those two businesses didn't do quite well. And so I thought I could succeed with new startups, but it didn't happen. And that's when I realized, oh, maybe this is not my calling. This is not my path, because I always believe that God has a best plan for me, and when He closes one door, He opens another. And so that's when I realized, oh, maybe this is not my sort of thing, because I had a dream of becoming a CEO of a public company, take my company public and work as a CEO, leading a major or corporation. But when that didn't happen, I was very disappointed, and I was kind of I was very it was hard for me. But later on, when I had an itch to ride motorcycle again and started going on these motorcycle trips, I realized this is so much fun. This is like an amazing adventure. I wouldn't trade this for being a CEO of a public company. So I realized that when that new companies didn't work out very well, I realized, oh, that was a blessing in disguise. It was at that time very hard. It felt like a failure. But then when I sort of shifted my focus to becoming more of a adventure motorcycle traveler and later author to write my book, Coming Alive on the Ride, it made sense because, I don't have to be a businessman until I die. That was one chapter of my life as an entrepreneur. And I retired as a tech startup entrepreneur when I was 50, 52. And I started a new chapter as an investor, so that there's something that I could do. But my true love is riding motorcycles and going on these new places across the world, and that's my new love. And as a result of that, I got to write this book, Coming Alive on the Ride, to share my journey of a Silicon Valley tech founder who succeeds and then feeling this emptiness and this void, and then fulfilling it with my adventure travels.
I could imagine in part of that transition of going from an entrepreneur to an adventurer, or realizing in that transition that you weren't going to have the same sort of success that you had originally with your prior business. What was that feeling like, though? Because I could imagine failing at that point, there must have been some sort of visceral response that you were dealing with, or maybe some, mental or emotional discomfort that you were feeling at the time. Take us through that moment. What was that like? That personal transition in that moment.
Yeah. So when I tried my best to build this new business with these two new startups, but the growth stalled, and we had hard time attracting the best talent and growing the revenue. That is really bad in Silicon Valley startup, because if your startup stops growing, with additional users and customers and revenue and profit, then it's not worth very much as a company. And so, when the business plateaued, and investors were concerned, obviously, and so they wanted to try bring in a new CEO to try to run the company, because I have given my best. I worked on building that company for 4 or 5 years. So, uh, you know, on the one hand, I was very disappointed at myself and also the investors that they will want to change the CEO position, effectively push me out and bring in a new CEO to run the company. So it was really hard, but I had to look out for all investors, including myself and employees. So I went ahead and stayed on the board and brought in new CEO. But ultimately, that business didn't work out. So even the new CEO couldn't really make it grow again. So when that happened, again, it was hard for me and it was stressful. And it was in that stressful period of my life when I was 47, 48 years old that I had some extra time because I was not working, as a CEO. I was on the board, but I was effectively out of work. And it was that time that I had this, extra time, and I wanted to. I was looking to figure out what to do next, and then that's the time that I had an itch to write, just as a self therapy, as a do something fun for myself while I have some extra time. So that was kind of my experience back then.
For somebody listening who is going through a transition like that, and in part of that transition, there's that loss of identity, because I can imagine, like yourself, you were doing this for so long. It was mainly what you knew and what you woke up every day doing and went to sleep every day thinking about and knowing you were going to do it again the next day. What would you say to somebody who is so tied to their identity with the work that they're doing currently and the work that they've done historically, and could be trepidatious about making that transition?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So um, in my book, I talk about when I was 60 years old. I went on this long motorcycle trip from LA to Newfoundland, Canada. It took about 40 days, and I rode about 12,525 miles. So it was a very long and great trip. But I was riding through the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and it was such a beautiful day. The sky was so blue, and the clouds were so white, and just it was just a glorious weather and a glorious, beautiful nature across the Rockies. And that's when I like realized I was so happy. I was so in this state of shinnage. Shinnage means this state of being so live and joyful. You're so immersed in your activity. I felt so blessed and lucky, and I asked him, "How did I get here?" Right? And that's when I started thinking about my childhood in Korea, my Silicon Valley experience, and what I'm doing now as a long distance motorcycle traveler across the continents. And I realized that my true identity is an adventurer, not an entrepreneur or business. Now, business and entrepreneurs are adventurers in a way because it involves element of risk. Something a company or business that you start may fail, and so there's an element of risk. Just as there are in motorcycle travel, you could have an accident, something may break down on you, or you could get sick when you're like on the road so far away from home. But the realization that my true identity is more of an adventurer or explorer gave me a new sort of sense of liberation or freedom that, oh, I don't have to be a retired businessman. I could be somebody new, a new identity. And that was quite liberating. And now I'm happy to be able to say that I'm an adventurer as part of, how I answer people's question, what do you do? Because that is such a common question, right? And I say, well, I'm an investor, I'm an author, but I'm also an adventurer. And they say, what do you mean by that? And I tell them that I go on these long motorcycle trips all around the world because I love it and I love exploring new places. So that makes sense to people when I talk to them.
It sounds like action created clarity for you. As you were moving across the country and going through your travels, your identity seemed to expand and you started to realize, wait a second, I'm something different. I'm something more. I'm still the same person, but I have much more to give. I have much more to explore. I have much more interest. What's interesting is I feel that people are really caught in somewhat of a rat race, let's call it, where, they're waking up, they're doing their morning hustle and bustle, whether they're alone and single and they got the routine, or they're with the family and getting everybody prepared. Then you got to go to work, and then you have expectations, accountability, responsibilities, etc. Then you're coming home and you're getting everything ready for the evening, and it's like you go to bed. So there's this cycle that most people go through, and I think that's why that old song, I forget who sings it, it's called, everybody's working for the weekend, and it becomes this repetitive thing. But within that, I look at it somewhat of a little bit of a narrow scope. It's a narrow lane that you're in when you're in that rat race. So you don't really have a chance to see yourself, your identity outside of that. So what would you recommend to somebody who is in that rat race, opposite to your situation where you had a little bit more free time to explore, but a lot of people don't. They're kind of caught in this cycle of life. What's your recommendation? What would you suggest for somebody who is in that cycle, giving them the ability to be able to expand their identity outside of what they're doing each day? How would you coach them, or recommend they start?
Right. Yeah. I think my best advice to someone in that shoes situation is to, take a day or two or three and go on a trip somewhere. And it doesn't have to be far, but someplace new that you haven't been to, and sort of take some do some adventurous thing, whether it's hiking across a trail in the mountains nearby where you live, or going to new town where you haven't been to, but do something that's new and different, but also a little bit challenging. That is a little bit of element of risk, makes you a little bit afraid or fearful, because it's those types of what I call cheap thrills that will stretch you, that will uh, that will make you a better person by taking that low cost, low risk, cheap thrill trips that will expand your horizon because you're out of your element, you're in a new place, you've done something that was considered dangerous or challenging, but you did it. And in that process, I think you find a little bit more about yourself and what you're capable of, and what you enjoy, and then use that experience to sort of maybe write a journal, or write how you're feeling about it. So in my case, when I go on these long motorcycle trips, I would write up my travel diaries or journals, and I would post it on Facebook, and along with photos and videos of these beautiful places that I'm visiting or riding through. So I would have, some friends and family who follow me along, and soon I had thousands of people from all around the world following me on my travel, on my Facebook post. And so a lot of people appreciated me sharing my trip through these Facebook posts, because they would love to do what I do, but they're not able to take 40 days off to do this, or they're not in such a good health, or whatever other sort of constraints that we all have. And so, but they were still able to enjoy what I was enjoying and what I was learning. And so, I think writing short diaries or journals of your new experience and sharing that with others and giving feedback is a great sort of reflection. It's like looking in the mirror, or is having somebody a different perspective than what you have been thinking about. So in my case, several people suggested, Michael, you should write a book about to share your story of coming from Korea and succeeding in Silicon Valley and my adventure motorcycle trips, because you have a very, very unique experience, very unique perspective, and so that's what got me to write a book and share my sort of journey. And I invite people to join me in my journey in my book, to sort of learn what I've learned, and learn what I realized through my 65 years of my life.
So I want to touch on the idea of someone's self-worth through identity. And when I was talking earlier about the rat race, and let's take that middle part of that day, your work, a lot of people find their worth or value based on the work that they do, the recognition, the praise, the success, all of those sort of things, right? The kudos, all of those things day by day add up to a person's identity. That's why a lot of people identify themselves by the work that they do. And their self worth is always established by their own minds based on what they're receiving in terms of feedback, and then how they're performing in their job and how other people see them, etc. So, how do you help people understand? And maybe you could talk about this from your own experience. If you're expanding beyond your identity, is worth still a value at that point? Or does your self worth change if it's not coming from something tangible like the output based on your input in the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So, I think, our fundamental worth as a human being, it doesn't change. I think it's all about application. And what I mean by that is, God created each of us uniquely and give us different talents, different abilities. I think it's a matter of discovering what that unique aspect of who you are, how you were created, and finding out more about how you can sort of bring out that talent and unique abilities and sharing with people and seeing what people enjoy about who you are and what you do. And it could be, it doesn't have to be motorcycle riding. It could be singing, it could be writing, it could be dancing, it could be, sports or whatever. But I think people want to be entertained and people want to learn, people want to be inspired. And so if you find your unique talent and ability and you apply that into whatever, different activities, and in a way that entertains and that educates and that inspires others, then I think you're making a difference in their lives. And so I think, so the worth of an individual, of a person, doesn't change. It's a matter of finding how you're created differently, and and doing different activities that utilize that talent and abilities, and applying that to people around you, and seeing how that is making a difference in their life. And I think that determines sort of the perceived value that's maybe different than the inherent or fundamental value.
What role does solitude play in finding your value and your identity?
Solitude, I think, is incredibly important and incredibly valuable because when we are surrounded by people, whether it's family, your even spouse, or best friends, or a group of people in a community, you are sort of, you're wearing a mask. You're supposed to play your part as a husband, wife, father, you know, son or daughter, as a friend, as someone at church or company. So you have to reply. But when you're alone, like in my case, I go on many of these long distance trips on my own, and a lot of people think I'm crazy to go on, motorcycle travel from LA to Alaska when I went up 2023 for 37 days. Uh, but over time, I came to realize that traveling alone is great because I'm completely free. I don't have to, check with somebody to, say, hey, can we eat this place, or can we stop at that place, or can we take a break here? I'm completely on my own, completely free. Whereas if I was traveling with a friend or a wife or husband or, children, I have to sort of make sure that whatever I'm about to do is okay with the other person. So you're sort of constrained. You're still chained because you have to move together. But traveling alone, being in solitude, gets rid of all that hindrance, all that limitation or constraints. So you're able to be more yourself, and you have more time to think on your own and reflect and ask questions. Things like, who am I really? And why am I here? Right? Or what why, what is the purpose of my life? What is the meaning? Right. So all these things, all these questions, I think you're in a better position to answer when you're alone than and being with other people. So I really think that traveling alone or being in solitude in whatever activity is a great thing to do because of these reasons.
So when you were on your own, Michael, and that question came up of what is the purpose of life, what answers did you come up with?
So I share my faith openly in my book Coming Alive on the Ride, but to me, I was created as a precious son of God, and that Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and that God created me to have good relationship with Him and to give Him the glory for through my life and share His love with others around me and bless other people. And so ultimately, I'm here to on earth to be of blessing and to have service to other people. And I realized that when I was writing my book, as I was thinking about what is the message and what is the meaning of all these things that I'm doing, and ultimately I want to invite people to join me in my journey, whether it's cross-continental motorcycle trips or a poor immigrant coming from South Korea to United States and going through the Silicon Valley tech, experience, and be uh, inspired or challenged to sort of think differently than how they have been, and step out of their comfort zone and embrace the adventure, embrace the uncertainty, the unknowns, the risk, and try the adventure. And I believe that you will find a better version of yourself by doing that.
And why did you want to share that in a book?
Well, I always think that learning by example is a great way. I learned a lot by watching the example of my uncle, who was a successful computer entrepreneur. Steve Jobs was another person, and so by writing my book, I'm openly sharing my life, my journey, both the failures and successes, some of the struggles, and by sharing my own experience of going through these journeys, I'm hoping that other people will say, oh, I didn't think about that, or that's a good point, so this is how Michael did it, and so maybe I could do something similar, or just apply myself in a way that's different just based on Michael's experience in his book.
And based on that, what was the most significant struggle that you had?
In writing this book,
Yeah.
well, I the English language is still hard for me. It's not my mother tongue. And so I studied, electrical engineering and computer science in college, and I, studied business at the graduate school. So creative writing was not my thing, but I had to learn how to write autobiography that has some resemblance of story structure. I didn't even know what story structure was, but I learned about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. There's a story structure and the arc. So I learned all that while I'm writing my book. And so I would say, writing was very hard. Finding a publisher and publishing the book is also very hard. I have a renewed appreciation for authors who've published their, writing through a publisher. And also promoting the book or getting the word out is hard. It's similar to tech startup because, when you create some new product or service, you need to let the world know about it. Otherwise, nobody would try it or use it. And so same thing with a book. So the marketing and promotion of the book. So to me, writing, publishing, and marketing the book was very, very challenging over the last 4 years since I've started writing the book.
And when you're writing it, I could imagine you mentioned that, English not being your mother tongue. However, illustrating your experiences in your own mind, I'm sure, are very vivid. You're clear. What was that process of adapting what you knew you were feeling and what you experienced onto paper. What was that process like for you?
Yeah. So um, that was another hard thing to discern whether to write about something that I feel like could be a subject of judgment by people, or something that maybe my family may feel ashamed because I may be disclosing some family, like secrets that my parents may not want the world to know about. I witnessed a little bit of domestic violence when I was growing up. Parents, arguing and fighting, and things are being thrown around and broken, and like other things, like some of the things that I witnessed growing up in Korea, when I was in the 60s. So it was not easy to decide whether to write some of those details, and it was very visceral because by writing about it, you're kind of going back to that period. There's a bit of a trauma, and there's a bit of a re-experiencing that as you're writing. But I also found that it's also therapeutic by sharing what you've went through, and putting into the words. And so yeah, that was a very interesting experience.
What was the hardest thing that you just mentioned there? You talked about um, there are certain experiences you felt were going to be judged. What was, if you could think of one of them, what was the hardest thing to put on paper that you felt uncomfortable with?
So, um, in my book, Coming Alive on the Ride, I write about my experience when I was like 8 or 9 years old. My uncle, who was a high school teacher, took me to a restaurant. It was a tiny hole in the wall restaurant, and it's pretty, shabby. But in Korea, there was not a lot of meat, protein. So in Korea back then, during the summer, it's considered the sort of the dog soup is considered aphrodisiac for men, and it's good for to eat during the summer. And so my uncle gave me a taste of it by giving me a spoonful. So I got to actually taste a little bit of that soup. And so I debated whether I should write about that in my book or not, knowing that that's considered not a very good thing in this culture. But I decided to write about it because that was a real experience, and so anyway, that was one of the difficult decisions that I had to make.
You you mentioned it felt therapeutic for you, and you've gone from being an entrepreneur, being on the road adventure with your motorcycle. Now you're on another adventure, writing a book, and opening up your mind and your life to thousands, millions of people. So, as you've gone through those progressions and those evolutions with yourself, what is it that you've discovered about yourself? What have you expanded to now that you've been able to write this and put this out there? And how is that therapy part of that?
Yeah, so um, you know, I discovered that I love sharing my experience through stories. And so I discovered my love of sort of the creative storytelling. And so I wound down my investment fund company that I've been running for about 9 years last year, so I could focus on my book and speaking at different places, as well as focusing on just storytelling, and whether that's a film or some other sort of medium in the future. But yeah, I love the creative storytelling aspect of things, because I think um, that words are very powerful and stories are very moving. And through the stories, you could change people's lives and make the world a better place. And that's one of the realizations while I was writing this book.
What was your best adventure on the road when you think about like all the adventures you had in that long journey? What stands out the most?
I would say my motorcycle trip from Los Angeles to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska in 2023 was by far the best trip. It was a solo trip. I knew I was gonna go by myself because my best friend at that time, he had a lot of work to do, so he couldn't join me. So, riding through the wilderness of Alaska. Alaska is a huge state, and getting to the top of Alaska, which is the northernmost motorable point of North America. You cross the Arctic Circle and get to the Arctic Ocean. On the way there, I decide to add to another challenge and go up to Tuktoyaktuk, Canada, in the Northwest Territory, which again is on the Arctic Ocean. It's a small fishing village where a lot of Inuit people still live. It's a town of 2,000, 3,000 Inuit people, and they still hunt whales for their sustenance. So United Nations gives them quota so that they can hunt whales because this is how they've been living for thousands of years. So I stopped in Tuktoyaktuk, and I got to actually taste muktuk, which is a blubber of a beluga whale, and I tasted it both raw as well as boiled, and it was a very very interesting experience to taste it. But I did it not so much because I needed the nutrition, but it was just a different experience, and I wanted to try that. And so anyway, it was a 37-day trip, about 11,000 miles from LA up to Tuktoyaktuk, and then on to Prudhoe Bay, down to Seattle, back down to LA. So, and it was, I would say, it was the most memorable trip. And of all my long distance travels in North America and South America, though Patagonia in South America was also quite beautiful, but I will say Alaska was much more rugged, and the wilderness is still more pristine there.
It's interesting because the first thing I think about when you talk about that journey, so you talked about some sites, you talked about some things that you experienced. However, I've always believed that people don't remember those topical things as much as they remember how it made them feel. And your book is called Coming Alive. So there must have been something about that one journey that felt different than the other ones as to being your most memorable. What was that feeling?
Well, when I was riding back from Alaska, um, I stopped in Seattle and stayed with a friend, and he knew a reporter of this online newspaper. And so I got to interview with that reporter who wanted to write about my motorcycle trip from LA, Southern California, all the way up to Canada and Alaska and back down. And in that article, in that interview, I basically encouraged the readers. I challenged the readers to take on a challenge and embrace the adventure and do something considered dangerous. Just not too dangerous, not so much that you would lose your life if something went wrong, but cheap thrill, low risk, low cost. Just try something that makes you a little bit scary, but do it because that's gonna make you a better person. It will like stretch your sort of envelope of your who you are and your sort of abilities. So, and that I think helped to clarify sort of my calling as a storyteller and as a motivator, or as someone who inspires others to embrace the adventure.
It's good to be on a journey of clarity because I think there's moments where you find out certain things, you have certain revelations or epiphanies about your life, about, the past, the present, the future. So you come out of there and you say, I want to tell stories. Do you see
Yeah,
yourself continuing telling stories? Is this a one and done thing, or do you want to continue doing this?
yeah. So when I started writing a book, I spent about a year writing my first draft of the manuscript. And then I got some help from a professional writer. And as I was talking to him to get the essence of the book, I told him about this Korean word called shinnage. Shinnage is the state of being very alive, very joyful, fully immersed, enthusiastic, that positive energy. So much so that you're so immersed in that activity, you forget, even the time passing, right? So I felt shinnage when I was playing in the schoolyard of Korea, whether it's on a jungle gym or playing with kids in the alleyways, playing soccer, and later on a motorcycle in America when I was 15, and then in my 60s when I'm traveling all the way across. So that that Korean word for shinage is something that I want to try to encourage people to re-experience. Some people know it, people have it because we all have childhood experience where we had that one activity that's just consumed us. I want to encourage people to sort of rediscover that memory, rediscover that, and do it when you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, or even later, because that's what we need. We need to re-experience that shinage feeling that we had when we were young, but somehow because of busyness of life and troubles of life, we never experienced that again. So I want to encourage people to do that, and I want to continue to sort of share the story of coming alive on the ride. In my case, it was on my motorcycle trip, but it could be very different for different people. But rediscover that shinage through adventure.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next part here, where I give the floor to the guests to recite their letter to their former self. You get a chance to speak to your younger self and tell them all that you know now that you wish you knew then. So, floor is yours.
But that's a not an easy question because I really don't have any regrets of my life. I believe that whether it was a success or failure, there was God's fingerprint on my life, and I'm very thankful to God for all the blessings. And so I would say the only thing that I would write to my former self when I was in my teenagers, I was quite insecure at that time. I was a 16, 17-year old. I had a lot of pimples. I couldn't speak English. I didn't have a girlfriend. And so anyway, I was quite insecure, and I was fearful that my life would be a struggle and I might not amount to much. And in a strange way, that was a source of motivation for me to work hard and study hard and make create better opportunity for myself. So maybe a letter would be that don't feel so insecure or fearful about your future, because everything will work out. Just keep working hard, embrace the adventure, and God will have a great plan for your life. So that's what I would write to my former self when I was feeling insecure as a teenager.
That's phenomenal. Is there anything, Michael, that we didn't talk about today that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, so I think that that sense of curiosity that we had a child, we want to discover that sense of wonder. I think that perseverance and patience are incredibly important, especially in these days where things are so trigger happy and things could get out of control so quickly. I think that persistence, that perseverance, that patience, and the resilience. When you face adversity in your life, don't give up. Don't like get down on yourself too hard. You got to get right back up and keep pushing forward. Take small risks, embrace the adventure, because all these things I've done, and I have done, it's been a great life for me. And my father taught me, he would always tell me that, harmony in your family is the foundation for your happiness. So make sure that things are peaceful and harmonious with your family, because if you cannot keep family in your household, how can you keep the world a peaceful place? And also be positive. Always be positive, be thankful for what you have, and enjoy life. That's live a cool life. That was his sort of teaching to me as I was growing up, and I think that's what I want to share with the audience as well.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciated you being here today.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. I enjoyed having this conversation.